My name is Melanie Robinson. I'm the program manager at the National League of Cities for Children in Nature, and I work on our Cities Connecting Children to Nature initiative. It's my great joy to welcome you here today for our session on citywide strategies for equitable access to nature. Cities and nature are not mutually exclusive. City leaders across the nation are employing nature-based strategies to improve everything from climate resiliency to children's health and well-being. With more than 80% of U.S. children living in urban areas, we want to consider and showcase how cities are creating abundant access to nature, proven benefits for all children, regardless of race and income. Cities Connecting Children to Nature, a partnership with CNN and National League of Cities, test the hypothesis that equitable connections to nature for children will advance farther and faster through the engagement of city government leaders. Since its launch in 2014, CCCN has directly engaged with leaders from more than 40 cities, which has produced new opportunities as well as many lessons learned and examples. During this session, you'll get a preview of planning methods and implementation strategies to influence change in your city. We want to begin by grounding ourselves in equity, then dive into strategies, which range from the importance of data in deciding strategies, to mayoral engagement, to placemaking, or aligning stakeholders around a Children's Outdoor Bill of Rights, also known as a COBOR, to enhancing libraries as venues for food production and outdoor experiences. City insights are shared via a collection of 20-minute TED Talks and 7-minute Pecha Kucha Talks, each followed by a brief Q&A period. Critical questions to reflect on as you hear from each of these amazing speakers, and I can attest they are amazing. Does my city offer enough places for children to connect with nature? What programs and policies show up at a citywide level and can draw children and families to nature more equitably? And how can my city integrate access to nature with other city functions? As you listen, I have a really special request for you. Please make our speakers feel welcome. 1, they are brave. 2, they are knowledgeable. And 3, I know they would appreciate feeling your support in this room and online. I know they can't hear you clap online, but throw some comments in there that say you're proud of them. We'll start with Rena Payan from Justice Outside, who will share a CCCN framework for advancing equity in children's connection to nature. For those here in person, there is a strategy tool on your table that you can reference, from identifying the parts of the puzzle that make up equitable access to giving examples of what each piece would look like. Rena?
Thank you. Thank you. That's so uncomfortable. Hi, I'm Rena Payan. I'm the Director of Grant Making for an organization called Justice Outside, and we have been in collaboration with CCCN for a while now. I want to start by acknowledging that we are on unceded and ancestral lands here today. Where I come from in California is the ancestral homelands of the Yokut-speaking tribes of the San Joaquin Valley. Our offices are based in Oakland, California, which is the unceded lands of the Ohlone people, Miwok, and Ramaytush Ohlone. And so as part of our land acknowledgement, it's really important that we don't just acknowledge the land that we're on and the historic injustices of Indigenous people being removed from the lands, but we ask ourselves, what are we going to do today? And today, we want to ask you, the audience, and ourselves, just like every other day, what we can do to affirm Indigenous sovereignty. What we will do to hold ourselves responsible for the respect of ancestral names, languages, and laws, and what we can do to end the erasure of Indigenous identity. One of those steps can be finding out which ancestral lands you find yourselves and your work on by visiting native-land.ca, which is an incredible resource that's been developed and shared throughout the conference. And so please take a moment for self-reflection and think to yourself, what can I do today to ensure that I am in better and right relationship with Indigenous people as well as the land? All right. So Justice Outside, sorry, my slides, oh, there we go. You warned me. Justice Outside advances racial justice and equity in the outdoors and environmental movement. We shift resources to, build power with, and center the voices and leadership of Black, Indigenous, and people of color because the health of current and future generations demands it. So that's a really nice way to say that we believe that racial justice is an integral and necessary component when talking about access to the outdoors. That has been the driver of our relationship with CCCN and the development of this tool, which is the Children's Equitable Access to Nature framework, okay? So CCCN developed this tool. We've been in relationship with them in the development of this tool. And so for CCCN, equity means cities achieve equity when children and families, I'm not touching anything. Okay.
If you want, you could just say advanced, and I think we could probably have the guys in the back. Do you want to do that?
Okay.
Hang up a little bit?
That's okay. I'm already 4 minutes in. We'll just fly through. So cities achieve equity when children and families stand on relatively equal footing and race no longer predicts resources and opportunities for nature connection. So this is really, really important because what we're talking about is race's impact on access to nature. And you may be thinking to yourself, but Rena, what about misogyny? Or Rena, what about disability? Those are very, very important factors for connection to nature as well, but the initiative has chosen to take an intersectional approach. And intersectionality, as it was coined by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw in the 80s, is really rooted in this idea that race leads and all other identities and experiences with oppression and marginalization intersect and compound that experience. So for a child who is white and has a disability, their access is going to look significantly different than a child who is Black or brown and has a disability and their connection to nature. So when we talk about equity, we have to be really explicit about race, okay? Which means that the first puzzle piece requires us to recognize and disrupt racism. And recognizing and disrupting racism means that we're continuously acknowledging, recognizing, analyzing, and interrupting institutional racism and its effects on residents, okay? What this can look like, I thought I fixed it. What this can look like is naming race as a core component of equitable access. So as you think about your city initiatives, are you being explicit about the role that race plays in access? And that may mean that you have to also include naming that not just communities of color, but also the access that white communities have in relationship, because race is not just a problem for communities of color. It is also a problem for white folks, which means that when we talk about access to nature, we should not just be talking about how communities of color do not have access. We should be talking about the disproportionate access that white communities have in their cities and how there needs to be a redistribution of resources to address that disproportionality. Not that we're taking things away, but an acknowledgement that white communities in cities across the country have greater access to park spaces, public spaces, and natural spaces than communities of color. And we have to recognize it and we have to say it out loud, because the more we say it out loud, the more we realize how ridiculous that concept is and how ridiculous that sounds when we're talking about every child should have access to nature. The second piece of this puzzle is recognizing that there are culturally diverse connections to nature. Recognizing the many ways that diverse cultures, ethnicities, and immigrant groups meaningfully connect to nature. That not everybody needs to connect to nature by going on some huge exploration in which they find themselves, they carried their own belongings on their back for 7 days straight, and they filtered their own water. That's not culturally relevant for every community, right? And so what does it mean to have culturally diverse connections to nature? It could mean that your services and programming reflect the needs and wants of communities of color, and there's a clear pathway for community members to tell us what type of nature connection they want and need, right? There has to be a clear pathway for communities to say, this is not relevant to me. I want something in my nature connection that feels relevant to me. I was telling a group yesterday that it's really important that we often think about camping as a great way to get families into the outdoor, and this idea of camping is not necessarily relevant. But when you change the language and the framework and you say, well, camping isn't anything more than a cookout and a sleepover, right? That is more accessible for some communities, where this idea of camping requires tents and bear bins and some type of cooking vessel. Well, all of those things can be encompassed within this idea of having a cookout. So are you using culturally responsive language, and are you deciding activities that feel culturally relevant to the communities you're looking to engage? Additionally, we need leadership opportunities for youth and residents. Do we provide leadership opportunities for youth and residents in the design and use of natural spaces? Now, there are whole consulting firms that can help you do this, and it's really, really important to understand that those consulting firms should be of the communities you're looking to engage in the design, right? If you are hiring a consulting firm from across the country to help you design a park, that's great. How is your community being impacted by that park? Part of that process. Can you find a design firm or a branch of that design firm that is closer to you, right? That knows and understands the community that you're working within. This could mean providing listening sessions, invitations, and communications in languages most relevant to communities of color, not simply as translation, but as the primary language spoken at events and in communications. Are you inviting people to your event and saying, we have translators, or are you having an event and saying, this is in Spanish? If you need English translation, talk to us and we'll get you an English translator. It sets the precedent that you are prioritizing people who speak a language that is not English, right? When you say, show up to this and we'll provide a translator if you need an English translator, not if you need a Spanish translator or a Tagalog translator, right? Do you acquire data on race and ethnicity? Do you regularly collect and use data broken down by race and ethnicity to reflect on progress? Does the use of data tell the story of disparities in health and wellness and the historic and current trends about communities of color and the environment? And here's an example. 81% of Latinos believe it's very important or extremely important for the country to make long-term investments in wind and solar energy. Even in larger segments, an even larger segment of respondents, 84%, said that it's very important or extremely important for the U.S. to make long-term investments in green infrastructure. So Latinx populations are showing up and saying, these are the things we want, and yet we constantly hear these narratives that Latinx populations are not engaged in green policy making. Right? It's not that they're not engaged, they clearly are, 81% and 84%, it's that their voices are not being centered when we think about what are green policies that are needed. Recruitment and hiring of people of color means expanding networks, shifting recruitment and hiring practices to support people of color joining nature-facing professions and city core teams. This may mean that you have to review insular hiring policies, including what we consider qualifications. Do we weight lived experience and knowledge of target neighborhoods, cultures, and languages as more important than skills that can be taught? I can teach anybody how to tie a knot if we're going to go rock climbing, right? I can teach them in a matter of 15 minutes and feel really good about it. I cannot teach someone what it means to come from Bayview's Hunter Point in San Francisco. So if I'm writing my job descriptions, am I asking them for their climbing experience before I'm asking them how well they know Bayview's Hunter Point? And if I'm asking them in that order, something is wrong. We need to elevate the lived experience as a qualification, not a nice to have. There's more about recruitment and hiring of people of color, equity outcomes in policies, practices, and investments. This is the last one, I think. So historically, No? There's something missing. Historically, the city's redlining policies meant that such and such neighborhood doesn't have a park or park access, so we are going to petition the city to allocate X amount of money to be invested in park spaces or public transportation that connects this neighborhood to quality park spaces. Okay? So when we're talking about equity outcomes in policies, practices, and investments, it's not one or the other. It's got to be all of it. So when you're asking your city officials, when we're talking to city officials about what's needed to connect young people to nature, we have to also talk to them about the city budget. And cities have to practice being more transparent about where they put their money, because where we put our money is where we show our priorities are, okay? If your city is not allocating the money, they can say that it's a priority, but the actions speak a very different conversation. So this is the framework, the resources on the table. I am way over time, but I appreciate you being here, and I'm happy to answer questions about the framework and how it came to be anytime after. I think I am done.
We've got time for one quick question, Rena. So does anyone in the audience have a question for Rena? You can say it out loud, and I'll relay it to her. Questions? All right. Can we get one more hand clap for Rena? If you're in the back, clap extra loud.